If you had asked me 15 years ago, what are your requirements for a mobile device? Today I would be sitting here with the most amazing flip phone that America could produce. And this is the problem in a microcosm that we have in government, which is, you have phenomenal, well-meaning people who are trying to predict the future on timelines that are almost impossible to see at a time where the threat is evolving and technology is changing at the rate that it is. And that process exists to build destroyers and long-range bombers and things that not many companies can build, that we're not going to build very many of, that the government has to really drive research and development for. The problem is, how do you create an alternative process for all of the different kinds of capabilities, like Heidi mentioned, that you mentioned, that are making such a difference in Ukraine, that have almost the inverse attributes of the military that we have. Large quantities of smaller, smarter, more autonomous systems, the software that brings all of that together. And how do you create an incentive where we can be surprised, where we aren't going to get our requirements right, where we can't predict the future? That is, I think, the main challenge here, is that we have a very statist, bureaucratic, centralized planning process to plan for the future. And we need to move to an alternative pathway that's built around capitalism and market creation for a different kind of class of capability that we're going to need a lot more of if we want to deter China on the kinds of timelines that Admiral Aquilino was talking about last night.
I'd like to dig deeper on that, but let me give Doug a chance here. So Doug's relatively new to DIU.
2 months.
2 months in to DIU. Friends of mine know that I always complain that they dropped the X because I think they should have stayed experimental, but that's just my little thing.
We could talk about that.
We can talk about that. Actually, Doug likes to talk about, we were talking about it in the bus last night. Quickly, your predecessor testified about how, this was last year, how DoD needs to ditch its requirements process for commercial technologies and replace it with what he called rapid validation of needs. His argument is that the DoD doesn't need to spend years developing existing technology. Do you want to talk quickly about how you got to where you are right now? Not your life story, but and then try to get at where we are on that issue now.
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Gordon, and thanks. It's great to be up here with my teammate and my teammate. First, I guess, maybe just to turn around the question that you didn't ask us a little bit about why we're still up here talking about this, because I think it's a little bit related to why I'm here talking about this, which is a combination of really the imperative and the opportunity. And the imperative is something we've been talking about already since last night and all through today. We simply must find a way to harness the capability of our commercial tech innovation, which is really one of the birthrights of us here as Americans, as well as our partners around the world, in order to meet the challenges represented by China, as well as the other critical challenges we have around the world. We're just not going to do it otherwise on the time frame that we need to. And frankly, one of the reasons we're still up here is because we haven't solved it yet. That kind of brings me to the opportunity, which is that the sense of shared purpose and trust that we have right now to get after this is fundamentally different. So although it's true that we're still up here talking about this, who we is actually pretty different. So when I first started coming to these meetings, I was kind of the only guy from Silicon Valley who was coming to these meetings where it felt like that. And now, look at who's here. Right? Look who's on the last panel, look at all the people in the audience, look whose names are up on the board. It's fundamentally different, and also look at the same time, the conversation that we're having inside the department and the level of tech fluency that we've seen already from leaders. So we're in a fundamentally different place on that dimension where we have a commercial tech sector that gets it, at least in large part in important ways. We have a department starting with the Secretary who gets it, and I'll come back to that in a second. We have partners across the interagency in the White House who get it, and we've got Congress who gets it. So that provides us, I believe, with a tipping point to make a difference, and that's kind of why I upset my apple cart, as I've spent 13 years at Apple working for Tim, and so to speak. But I spent 26 years simultaneously in part of it in uniform with the Navy, and bringing those things together is sort of better. So to your point, can I quickly answer sort of where we're headed? Okay, so Really, the simplest way to think about it is if you think about phase one of DIU, and I was part of helping stand that up first as a civilian advisor and then as a reservist in DIU-X.
They couldn't even get internet at the time.
There you go. Back then, really it was just about building a bridge kind of at all between the department and the tech sector. And the metric then was if we had a meeting, who would even come from either side, and did they see any value there? We are light years past that now. So step two then was about proving that you could take a real military problem of the kind that Mike Brown was talking about and a commercially available or tailorable technology, bring those things together to create a solution and rapidly use unique authorities, or not that unique authorities, to rapidly prototype that and get it available to the warfighter. And we've now done that many, many, many times. In fact, it's delivering value all over the place, including Ukraine. The challenge now is about taking that capability that we've built and applying it to our most strategic needs.
Scaling it.
Scaling it. So it's about focus, speed, and scale. And that's a lot harder because it's not about starting kind of nifty tech out. It's about as Heidi was saying, most critical operational capability gap back. And then making sure we're solving those problems, and then we're doing the work with the rest of our partners across the board, with COCOM, services, partners in OSD, to get that scale to happen. Making that happen is what this next phase of DIU is all about, and that's why the Secretary elevated it to be a direct report, and that's why I'm honored to come and try to be part of the team.
Great, thanks for all those answers. I want to go back to Ukraine quickly and try to get kind of specific answers as best as possible. Is like, from where each of you sit, what have you learned from Ukraine? You see these cheap technologies wreaking havoc on the battlefield. Seems like the Pentagon is still focused on big platforms that take years to build. I think the Army may have set out a solicitation recently for a certain kind of drone 2 years, a year and a half into this fight. What is Ukraine teaching you guys, and what's tangible things are producing out of it a year and a half after the war started?
Yeah, so,
go ahead.
Okay, so absolutely we're taking the lessons learned from Ukraine, and we are incorporating that into our strategy in the next highly contested fight, okay? One of the things that we have been doing, which we don't talk too much publicly, is incorporating those lessons in terms of what we need to drive in terms of the technology and how we can leverage the commercial side. And one of the key things that we're doing is a rapid defense experimentation reserve. What we, we're acronym heavy, so we call it RADAR, okay? So RDER. What we've done there is we planned out a specific scenario that SecDef chose. So the scenario of interest, from that scenario of interest, we work very closely with Joint Staff and combatant commanders, say what are the capability that's needed to fight in that particular scenario. We then looked at what are the companies out there that designing, delivering capability already at the prototype stage we can experiment. So what we have done is contacted every single service, every single combatant commander, and we held an industry day in which 500 people attended and provided just white paper. This is what our product is. We selected those, and in May timeframe, we leverage the National Guard to literally conduct a week-long experimentation, and we provided feedback to the small companies. Hey, this is really great, but this is kind of fragile. Can you harden this so if somebody drops it, it doesn't break? Okay, so simple things to provide feedback to the small companies.
If I could interject, the process you described sounds like something I've heard, the kinds of things you hear when you hang around places like the Pentagon, which sounds like it could be a very iterative process taking years. What is the Pentagon doing, next week or next, month?
Let me finish.
Okay.
Okay. So the experiment, what we have learned here, literally is going to, all the equipment is going to a northern edge exercise, okay? From that exercise this fall, we're teeing up. Here's our success story. Here's what has worked really well, okay, that we want to tee up. So the decision maker, every single service with joint staff and all the combatant commander will say, okay, here's a list of stuff that's worked really well. How do we rapidly accelerate fielding? That's the key part to get into procurement. I've already worked very closely with my counterpart, Dr. Bill LaPlante, who's acquisition sustainment. He has developed a number of rapid acceleration processes. So once we identify, here's a list of stuff that we want to accelerate into fielding, we have the mechanism in place, the processes in place. I can tell you, it's a very funny story. Give me 1 second, okay? There's one prototype in which one of the Marine tested it out. He said, this is fantastic. I absolutely need this. I'm going to deploy. I'm coming up to my deployment. So he wouldn't give us back the prototype. He literally took it. He deployed with it. So that tells me that's great. There's a demand signal for the product, right?
Good. Speaking of Bill LaPlante famously referred to the tech bros not doing enough for Ukraine. Chris, you're a tech bro.
Have I become that?
Yeah, we just certified you today.
My card in here somewhere.
Yeah. I know your company's doing a lot with Ukraine. Talk about that issue for you.
Yeah. So it's funny on Dr. LaPlante's comment. I saw him after he made that, and he immediately started apologizing. No, I didn't mean. I was like, just stop. You're right. It's all about production, right? If you're doing small-scale things, you're not making an impact at the level that we need to. So whether it's an old capability that we need a lot more of, or a brand new capability that we need a lot more of, to Heidi's point, it is all about how do you get into production. To your question about Ukraine, I think to me, tons of lessons, but 3 stand out right off the bat. One, we tend to talk about the future of war as this thing that is going to happen to us that we have time to get ready for, and I think Ukraine has just laid that bare. This technology is here. We're not talking about photon torpedoes and cloaking devices that need to be developed. We're talking about things that are literally on the battlefield now that need to get developed and fielded in other areas. I think secondly, with respect to that process, the things that you're going to field are not going to work initially. Drones are going to fall out of the sky. The loitering munitions are not going to go where you want them to. So it's less about the capability. It's more of the agile process that you have, excuse me, working directly with the end user to improve those capabilities in what is a very dynamic environment where you and the adversary are engaged in this move, counter move type of process, and you have to stay continually one step ahead. And the only way you do that is tightly coupled with the end user, and that's definitely been our experience in Ukraine. But the third thing I'll say is I think the bad news coming out of the war of Ukraine is that power projection is really hard. In the teeth of a well-armed and ready defender, power projection is really tough. And I think that is a tough lesson for the United States military to hear, because we have largely built our force around power projection. The good news is that if we do the right things, power projection could be hard for everyone. So when you talk about a Taiwan Straits type of contingency, the only thing harder than having to defend against it is probably doing it. So if you actually make your partner ready and equipped with the right kinds of capabilities that are not necessarily going to be nuclear submarines and other things, are going to look more like the kinds of capabilities that are making a difference in Ukraine: smart weapons, large quantities of fires, networked together. You actually can create that deterrent effect in the mind of the adversary that this is just a problem that I do not want to pick off today. And we buy time and we push that future risk into the future rather than having it continue to creep left the way that it has been doing. And now we're looking at 2027 as the potential date that we need to be ready, which means
like
that
tomorrow.
Well, no, to be very clear, right? Getting ready for 2027 does not start in 2027, right? It basically means that anything that we do this year and next year is what we will be sending our men and women into harm's way with, God forbid, if they have to engage in that contingency. So there is a sense of urgency about getting to scale now, and the decisions that we have now have a transcendent importance.
I was going to throw something at you, but answer quick, whatever you want to say.
Okay, I'm just going to maybe although I guess I don't have time, so maybe I can't get back in the good books with being quick, but I want to be quick.
Sorry for all the talk of quick, but we're just quick.
So three quick things that I think we've learned that are great, and one not yet. One is the value is just absolutely clear from commercial technology. We're seeing that all over the place. Everything from commercial space, whether it's in collections or analysis in the cloud, to secure comms across different flavors of network where the networks have been destroyed, to crowdsourcing of targeting and everything else. So that's great, and it's demonstrating that impact, and it's demonstrating that it can have leverage to make a real difference. Second, the ability to move to share those things with partners and move very, very quickly. There are two things in there. One is move quickly, just straight off the bat, where places where, for example, DIU had helped to prototype some of these things that made it really easy to go move fast. That's great. And also the fact that, frankly, because these are commercial technologies, it's a lot easier to get them in the hands of partners than things that may have already become a program of record. In fact, Chris and team have had to deal with the fact that some stuff that they've done has become a program of record, and that has to do with little procedural things to get it shareable, whereas something that's more quickly tailored off the shelf can go even faster. So, that's great news. As well as the speed, there's also just the UI UX of some of this stuff makes it so that training, instead of months, is weeks or days. The third thing that we've learned is about embedding our folks with the in this case, UCOM, in order to solve those problems quickly and help to shape what the needs are. And what the imagined problem is, not the requirement, because the requirement, as soon as you get there, you're in the wrong place. So those are all great. The thing that we haven't done, and Chris alluded to this, we haven't figured out still how to scale that, and this is what Heidi was getting at as well, and do it quickly. That's what we're focused on now, and we need that scale both so we can get our strategic impact on the problem, but also, frankly, without that scale, the economics don't work for the people who are doing this. So at the same time that we're putting a lot toward foreign military sales of more traditional capability. Think of there are orders and orders and orders of magnitude more dollars going into that happening. What's happening in commercial? We need to start to crack that.
Good. And to your point about commercial, I think, Heidi, you had 14 critical technologies you identified, and 80% of them are commercial, or deemed commercial. Eric Carrilla at U.S. Central Command has done this kind of created these task forces, one for water, one for air, and soon one for land. I wonder, just briefly, if you could say if this is a model for commanders that works. What does, I don't want to overstate its effectiveness, but it's gotten a lot of like buzz because it's, you know, cool and off-the-shelf stuff, underwater drones, air drones. Does that model work? And then back to the scaling, how do you scale, not only for his region, but for the much more massive region in the Pacific?
Can I jump on that one?
Sure.
Okay, so first of all, I think the answer is yes and. Because Task Force 59, 99, these are great examples of being able to get stuff out there and start making it real. And you know, the Navy's now up to about 100 unmanned vessels out doing real work, making real things happen, and that's great. You hit on exactly the point, which is taking this to scale, which is where we're going to go next. Now, the Navy, and I'll say this as a Navy guy, this is an area where the Navy is going from not always being the fastest to being one of the fastest and thinking about ways to do this. And so what was announced by CNO and Secretary Del Toro in April about now leveraging Fourth Fleet to do this at scale for maritime domain awareness, leveraging AI and those sensors in order to make that happen. That's a great example of beginning to scale these things. And we've got to go a lot faster and a lot bigger in terms of what that scale really means in order to get to solving the problem that we're talking about, and critically to starting the flywheel spinning of demonstration that makes it easier for the investment to start all the way from the beginning for these commercial technologies, which is something we haven't really talked about a lot today, but I know is important to a lot of the people who are from the world I just came from who are here today, in order to make that happen in a way that scales.
Does the acquisition bureaucracy, what is the extent of the acquisition bureaucracy's problem when it comes to this? Like, what's wrong with acquisition? Which is a huge rhetorical question, I suppose. But like, Chris, do you want to just like talk real quick about how they get in the way, because that's the criticism.
Yeah, I guess, I mean,
civilian.
Yeah. Again, the acquisition system and bureaucracy comes in for a ton of blame, and you know, they deserve their fair share. I guess the point that I would just want to really kind of impress upon you is the acquisition system is but one part of this broader system that the United States government and allied governments use to think about the future, plan for the future, and go buy things that they're going to need, like spend money today to get things tomorrow. That is a hard problem, right? Particularly in the world of defense where like, I can't go out in a commercial market and like see what people like. How do I get market feedback when I'm not, hopefully, engaged in wars all over the place, right? So it is a genuinely hard problem. I think the process and system that we have in place to do it is a relic of the Cold War that frankly looks more like China at its worst than America at its best. And I think what we need is you're never going to have capitalism for aircraft carriers, right? You're going to have one company that builds them, and you're going to do the best you can to get performance in the absence of competition. What you desperately need for the kinds of things we're talking about here, where you're not going to go buy loitering munitions off the shelf, but like, boy, you can field them by the thousands if you put your mind to it in a 3 to 5 year process. Those are the kinds of things, like a completely alternative pathway of how do I go buy capabilities that are going to make a difference now, knowing that I'm probably going to get my requirements wrong at the outset, and somewhere along the way, something better is going to come along, and I'm going to have to switch.
I think that's what Kirilla's example shows, is like, try it, fail, fail, fail again, and then tweak it.
But again, I think this is back to the sort of systemic problem of the DoD. General Kirilla, Admiral Aquilino, they own mission problems, but they do not own the ability to deliver solutions to solve their problems, right? That is the behest of the military services, other parts of the department that do the organized training and equipping. So you have a supply and demand problem. The question we're talking about is how do you adjudicate supply and demand? He is trying to generate demand, but if the rest of the institution doesn't ride to the rescue and say, this works, you have 3, we're going to get you 1,000, then it's all theater. And I think that's the problem that we've had recently, is that much of this innovation has been theater. It's been the appearance of reality without delivering real capability at the kind of scale that's going to matter. Ukraine has been sort of a pickup game. I think we've learned an enormous amount of lessons that Heidi and Doug are harvesting to try to solve this problem for the future. But like, to be very clear, we are not where we need to be, and we are running out of time to get this right.
Can I comment?
Yes. I want to try to get one question in from you guys. You guys probably ask better questions than me, but let's get Heidi go, and I have one other question, and then we have apparently 2 minutes.
Okay. One of the things that we're doing, even though it's not that much money, last year I had $100 million procurement money, in which literally we could help small companies that has delivered prototype that the services want. But because it's a 2-year budgeting cycle, once, so the services want you to demonstrate capability first before they want to buy it. Once you demonstrate the capability, then they will basically put it in their budget request. But it's a 2-year budget cycle. So companies have to sit there and wait for twiddle their thumb for 2 years, okay? So what we did is literally go to all the services to understand what needs that they have. We look at the small company, what product have they produced? And literally we met with all the services to rack and stack. How would we put the $100 million? So 10 companies received just $10 million each, but I can tell you, some of the small companies got the $10 million and they were able to push forward integrating the underwater mine sensor to be able to detect underwater mines. That's incredibly important. And they're putting it onto a underwater vehicle, unmanned underwater vehicle. So we helped to accelerate the delivery by 2 years. So that was that pot of money. And this year we had $150 million. I was able to give 11 companies. So it's hard to scale. If I had $1 billion, I can pull them through low rate initial production a lot quicker, right? But with a limited amount of money, that's all you can do.
Could I just say one thing very briefly? This is why I think it's so important if you see what the Congress is doing right now in terms of appropriating up to $1 billion for Doug to do exactly what we're talking about here in terms of pushing things from initial prototype to large-scale fielding, like getting over that valley of death.
Fair point. Just with deference to our beautiful audience here, can I just get one question, time for one question, which we're right at 0. So make it sing, very short, no speeches. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much. My name is Major Rudy Novak. I teach at the U.S. Air Force Academy. So my question for all of you is, what are some specific policy or regulatory things that you would have right now through whatever means to actually get to scale and actually get to the end product of the warfighter? What would you change right now?
Real quick answers, shotgun here.
Go ahead.
So I would say, first of all, not every single prototype is going to make it into production, because we depend upon the services to tell us what's your need. They have a finite budget and they have to allocate their needs. So they will go through the rack and stack to say, okay, these are really important. This is what I truly want to pull through quickly. Okay, so we have to go through this process right now, which is called the Defense Management Action Group, DMAG, on annual basis, in which every service go through their portfolio to talk about, here's what we want to put our budget against. Okay, so
very briefly, and I'm not being flip, I actually think we're like wildly overthinking this problem. So I think for a lot of the types of capabilities we're talking about, the Defense Department, the US government, just needs to buy them. It needs to actually be a better buyer, bringing its sort of monopolistic power to bear to say, loitering munitions or large autonomous undersea vehicles or drones, if that is what is important, I'm going to buy them in large quantities. And I'm not going to like buy one for forever and operate and maintain it for 20 years. I'm going to buy these capabilities in a more rapid way so that you can actually begin to create the incentive structure for companies to get to scale and for new companies to see a pathway to break into a market that is very impenetrable. That's what we don't do right now. That's to my point about market creation. Like, how do we get capitalism back into defense? You're only going to get it in certain places, but boy, can you, if the government is actually using its power as a buyer to buy the kinds of capabilities that we're saying are important. And tomorrow, that's probably going to be different. So these are not 20-year programs of record. They have to be large-scale lots that then get, kind of replaced over time.
Good answer, Doug.
So first, I would just say amen to everything that Chris just said, and I'm going to take the, and I do think a lot of this is just about getting out of our own way, using the capabilities that we've got, and just doing it. Point one. Point two, I'm going to take the what we would ask for one notch slightly different. I do think we need to make it easier for incredible dual capability, dual fluency talent to move in and out of the department. That's something I think would be great for us to figure out how to do. And I'll maybe just leave us with the thought that reiterating something I said before, which is I really do believe that we are at a tipping point now, both because the shared sense of purpose and trust around trying to solve this problem is in a place that I've at least never seen it, and second, because we have to. And so I'm excited about getting after it.
Thanks so much. I hear the Notional Orchestra music playing. Join me in thanking our panelists for talking. And I'm sure we'll be back next year to talk about more of it.